feeling when you're lying awake at night, phone face down on the bed, room quiet except for some distant sound you can't quite place, and suddenly it hits you? That sense that everyone else is moving forward, building something, becoming someone, while you're somehow standing still. Even though, if you really look at your life, you're not. You've done things. You've survived things. You've carried weight most people never saw. And still, there's this quiet voice that says you're late, behind, missing something essential. Maybe it shows up when you see an old friend's update, or when a birthday passes and the number feels heavier than it should, or when someone casually asks, "So what's next for you?" And you smile while something inside you tightens. It's strange, isn't it? How you can be responsible, capable, even admired, and yet feel like you're failing at a race you never remember signing up for. And the hardest part is that you don't talk about it, because on paper, your life looks fine, sometimes even impressive, and you don't want to sound ungrateful. So you carry the feeling quietly, wondering what's wrong with you for feeling this way at all. Maybe you learned this feeling without realizing it. Maybe it started early, back when being mature for your age was treated like a compliment, when adults leaned on you a little too much, when you learned to read a room before you learned how to ask for help. You might not remember a single dramatic moment, just a long stretch of being needed, being useful, being the one who didn't cause trouble. You became reliable, steady, self-contained, and somewhere along the way, life stopped feeling like something you were allowed to grow into slowly and started feeling like a responsibility you had to manage correctly. So now, years later, when you look around and see people experimenting, failing loudly, changing paths without shame, something in you whispers that you missed a step, that you should be further along by now, even though you've already been running for so long. You know that exhaustion that doesn't come from doing too much, but from never fully letting your guard down, from always being the strong one, the reasonable one, the emotionally regulated one. Even rest can feel unproductive, like you're cheating somehow, like softness has to be earned. And when you finally do slow down, the silence can feel unsettling, because that's when the questions show up. Who am I if I'm not holding everything together? What do I want if no one is asking me to be anything for them? There's a particular loneliness in that, a kind that doesn't come from being alone, but from being unseen in your effort, unseen in how early you had to grow up. You might notice how hard it is for you to receive care without immediately thinking about balance, repayment, fairness, how you minimize your own needs because others have it worse, how you feel guilty for wanting more ease, more joy, more time. And maybe you've told yourself this story, that you're just late to life, that something essential didn't click for you at the right moment, that if you'd made better choices or been braver earlier, you'd feel more settled now. But if this resonates, you're not imagining it, and you're not behind. What you're feeling is the after-image of having to be strong too soon. When you spend your early years adapting, managing, emotionally scanning, you don't get the luxury of moving at the same pace as people whose only job was to discover themselves. Your timeline bends around survival, around responsibility, around staying safe. And later, when the external pressure eases, there's this delayed grief that shows up. Grief for the parts of you that didn't get to be careless, or confused, or openly needy. It can feel like everyone else is ahead, when really they were just allowed to be unformed for longer. Sometimes that behind feeling is actually your nervous system finally exhaling and asking, is it my turn now? And not knowing what to do with the space. You might notice how incredibly self-sufficient, how you pride yourself on not needing much, how asking for help feels heavier than just doing it all yourself. That strength kept you alive, kept things functioning, but it also taught you to disappear inside competence. And now, when life isn't actively falling apart, you feel oddly lost because crisis was the map you learned to navigate by. Without it, direction feels unclear. There's a quiet sadness in realizing that you don't actually know what pace feels natural to you, because you've always been matching someone else's urgency, someone else's expectations. And so you measure yourself against milestones that were never designed with your story in mind. Careers that assume emotional safety, relationships that assume you know how to lean, timelines that assume you are free to explore without consequence. No wonder you feel behind. But maybe what you're really feeling is the weight of unprocessed years. Years where you showed up without being held, where you were praised for coping instead of comforted for hurting. Healing, in that context, doesn't look like catching up. It looks like slowing down without shame. It looks like letting yourself want things without immediately interrogating whether you deserve them. It looks like noticing how harsh your inner voice becomes when you rest, and gently asking whose voice that really is. You're allowed to question the idea that worth is proven through endurance. You're allowed to grieve a childhood or an earlier self that didn't get enough softness. That grief doesn't mean you're broken, it means you're honest. And maybe, over time, you start to feel something shift, a small permission forming inside you. Permission to be a beginner again, permission to not know, permission to choose things because they feel right, not because they make sense on a timeline. You might still feel that pang when you compare yourself to others. That reflex doesn't disappear overnight, but you can meet it with curiosity instead of cruelty. You can say, "Of course I feel this way. Look at what I carried." There's a quiet dignity in that recognition. Strength doesn't have to mean constant self-abandonment. It can mean staying with yourself when the old urgency flares up, when the fear of falling behind tightens your chest. It can mean building a life that fits your nervous system, not just your resume. And maybe healing isn't about finally arriving somewhere impressive, but about feeling at home in your own pace, your own unfolding. If you sit with that for a moment, what would it be like to stop chasing the version of you who was supposed to be further along, and start listening to the one who's here now, tired but still hopeful, still capable of joy? You don't need to prove that you've suffered enough to deserve rest. You don't need to justify your need for gentleness. If you're feeling behind, maybe it's not a failure. Maybe it's an invitation to live more honestly, more slowly, more aligned with who you actually are. And if you want, you can stay here with that thought for a while. Let it settle. Maybe even share what it brings up for you, or just sit quietly and breathe, knowing you're not alone in this feeling, and that it doesn't mean what you think it means.